Now, if I were to do a little quiz here and ask you all to write down a list, without looking in the Bible, but you've read Proverbs, okay, you have some sense of kinds of things Solomon dealt with, and you came up with a list of the sorts of content that concern Solomon, I'm betting you wouldn't come up with the inspired list in 1 Kings chapter 4. Here's the list. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish and of caribou. Okay? It's kind of shocking. You know, you think, here's this great man given godly wisdom, superior to that of anyone, and he's like a National Geographic special. And I think that this inspired text is telling us that the source of Solomon's wisdom, wisdom that was applicable in many areas of life, required reflection on the things that God had made. We are told that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but this text suggests that the trajectory of wisdom takes it through regions that are shaped by the givenness of creation. It starts in the fear of the Lord, but it goes out to look at the world, to look at what God has made. And this chapter ends with this testimony to the universality of Solomon's wisdom, demonstrating that his insights were not just a reflection of Israelite culture. They weren't something socially conditioned. People of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. This was universal wisdom given to this man of God through the means of his reflection on the stuff of creation. I think that's an example of the way in which this older view, this view that the cosmos contained within them some patterns, that reflection on which gives us guidance for life, how this view was present very much in the Old Testament. The Psalms reflect the same kind of idea. And very often in Psalms, there's a commingling of descriptions of the physical ordering of creation and the moral order of creation. They're not separable as they are for us. Okay? We don't assume, even Christians tend to assume that morality is somehow detached from the world of space and time and matter and motion. Let me take Psalm 96 as an example. In verses 4 and 5, the psalmist distinguishes Yahweh from false gods. For great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. In other words, he's the real God because he's the creator. He's the one that made things. He's the one that deserves worship. And this is a theme that comes in over and over. He deserves worship not just because of his character, not just because he's good and merciful, but he's the maker. Go through the Psalms sometime, go through all the Psalms, and make note of every time God's identity as creator is present, and you will be, I think, surprised. It is in a sense, I think, the chief characteristic of God. And then after he's identified as the true God in this psalm, there's an encouragement to worship him because of this identity as creator. And then the psalmist continues by affirming the rule that the creator God has over everything he's made. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Now notice, we've moved from the idea of he made everything right to this idea of justice or judgment. A kind of proto-political idea, if you will. He's the maker. His identity is that of the maker. He's established an order in the nature of things. The world is established, it shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. It's all actually one sentence. This is not a deist picture of a prime mover who winds up the physical clockwork of the cosmos, or even one who establishes a moral law and then walks away and sees what we do with it. There's simultaneously affirmed a fixity of creation that is both physical and moral. The one who established the foundations of the earth is the one who will judge the peoples with equity. And then the whole creation in this psalm is depicted not as meaningless raw material that's awaiting human exploitation, as we moderns see natural resources, as we call them. But the whole of creation is depicted as a worshiping chorus of God. Creation not only has order, but creation is depicted as testifying to and praising God for his justice, not just the sheer act of generating the world. Let the heavens be glad and let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in his faithfulness. So not only does God establish the continuity of the moral and physical order in creation, not leaving us to invent morality out of our sheer preference, but establishing a moral order there. But then the physical world itself is depicted as delighting in his righteousness. There's a resonance between the stuff of creation and the moral order, the moral order that characterizes God himself, which he has then imparted to creation. In the biblical picture, the order of the material creation, the form of creation, often described in terms of God setting the foundations of the earth, is not separable from the moral order established in things. There's a coherence between the structure of the world and the moral order of human life. I think that's behind Paul's declaration of moral order in the structure of creation in the first chapter of Romans. Paul insists there has been enough evidence in the things God has made concerning his character and his moral expectations, evidence available ever since the creation of the world, that those who disobey God are without excuse. There's a moral order that's evident in the stuff he has made, which is just making more explicit what I've suggested is in these Psalms. Not only is the glory of God evident in creation, the heavens declare the glory of God, not only is his glory available to us in creation, but the duty of man toward God is also evident, which would seem to include duties concerning how we ought to live, not just how we regard God, but how we actually live out our lives in space and time as embodied creatures. And so again, creation is a guide to our cultural life, including our political life. The nature of nature should inform the structure of culture. That's a viewpoint that's been lost in the modern world. Culture is now what we make. So nature and culture are pitted against each other, if there is such a thing as nature. Francis Schaeffer used to talk about true truth. I want to affirm real reality. That nature has a nature. Human nature has a nature. And that law, rightly understood, is rooted in that reality, in the pre-existing order that's there by the Creator. Back to music just for a moment, because I got to bring Bach in here, okay? How many of you know Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? How many of you know his Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency? Oh, you're missing some great stuff. Okay? Okay, that's another assignment. I don't know. Because there's some really great Bach stuff going on. I mention it. I'm not going to tell you about the story. It's a fun story, a little irreverent at times, but at the core of it is a recognition of the themes I'm going to mention here. I actually footnote. You mentioned my Mac computer. I listen a lot to streaming audio on my computer, and the BBC is currently running a 6-part audio drama of